GM, everybody, hello, and welcome to a new session on BLS Beam live stream, where I'll be hacking on Samui Wallet, our application for Solana Cypherpunk Hackathon. Let me actually switch around. And let me put this on pause so I heard the audio is right. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And I'll be presenting today like so. I will need to update the screen a little bit, so bear with me while I do this. And in the meanwhile, welcome everybody. It's great to be there. GM Steve, good to see you here. Good to have you on the show. It's always nice to have friends joining in. So yeah, today I'll be talking about Samui, and let's get the first things. So follow us on X. And then while Steve is here, I might as well plug it. Steve is the person that provided us with RPC. So I did mention this last week. While we got this, we've been tweeting quite a bit. If you're not following us already, please do. But let me see, there we go. Steve Legend gave us free RPC while we're at the hackathon. So this is greatly appreciated. We really need it. And today I'll be working on one of the features. So let's dive right in. I need to set up my development environment. So I'm going to be opening the browser, which is my editor, which you should be seeing right here. I think I'll zoom it in a little bit. Let's take like 150%. Do git clone, get the latest and greatest. So I should have my settings UI. That's amazing. And then let me start the app real quick, and we can take a look what we have right here. So I'm going to move this back, run it back to my Twitter. So if there's anything happening on X, I'll see it there. So great, application built. So that's all good. I'm going to start it in dev mode. Sat here with my coffee. So let's kick it off. So this is still very bare bones, but at some point this will be a wallet. And one of the things that every wallet has is a settings section. So we started modeling that as well. Right now it's just a clusters option. And one of the things that we like to do with these clusters, so you can add a new cluster. Let's add 8899, which is localnet, right? And we can give it a name, localnet, whatever, great. Added this cluster, I can edit it, add it, all good. Edit localnet, and I can delete it right afterwards. Now, still some stuff clearly to be updated and improved here, but the basics work. Now, what doesn't work is having the notion of having a selected cluster. So what I want to do here is have an icon that allows me to select a cluster as active. In fact, when you onboard on the wallet first time, it should select one and will probably go for DevNet. And we need to store that setting somewhere. Now, we can take a brief look at how these things are stored in general. So I'll go over how data is stored in Samui in the wallet. So we have a database here. And that's divided up here in packages. We have a database package. And in this database, we have a bunch of schemas. Let's go with the entities first. So we have an entity, which is a cluster entity, which is the one we're looking at. And then if we see how this is defined, we actually don't imperatively define the type or the interface, but instead we infer this from a schema. So we're using a result schema here to define what the cluster actually looks like. Now, how would normally do this? GM Chibis, it's great to see you here. Thanks for joining the show. Always good to have more people joining. I know you're working on some relatively similar stuff with wallet UIs and UIs, so we'll probably connect on Samui soon. Hope to catch up. Anyway, how I would normally store this active state is would basically add a property called active, which is then Boolean and default false, which works. But this also is kind of annoying because if you want to set like a new cluster to active, you basically have to update all of these entities, make sure they're all false except the one that you want to activate. So this is not great. I think this pattern is called semaphore, but I'm not really sure. So my co-founder, Toby, and if you don't follow Toby, make sure to give the guy a follow. Toby Codes on X. So I think that'll be here. So let me actually, where's my address bar? There you go. Make sure to give Toby a follow while you're at it. If you don't follow him already, guy's a legend. He's working on Samui. He actually unlocked a great important thing today, which is up in our GitHub. And again, also please give our GitHub a star because we can really use all of this attention during the hackathon. Anyway, I digress. So Toby told me let's try and do this differently. So what I'm going to do today, and that's the goal of the show, we're going to be adding a preferences schema. So we're going to be storing preferences. So I guess let's just start with it. And now these entities are generally singular. And we start with the really basics. So all of these things, a single preference has a ID created and updated at timestamp. This is just standard database preferences. And then I guess the way we want to do this is basically have a key value store. So the shape of what we're after is basically something like this. Preferences equals, let me actually make this a comment. Move that back here. There we go. Const preference equals. So what I want to end up with is whatever ID created at updated at. This is all not super interesting, but then for instance, I want to be able to say active cluster equals, so key active cluster value, and then whatever the ID of the cluster it is. So this is the very basic of what I should be able to store in this database. Now, with all of these things, you can make it as fancy as you want, but I like to keep things simple for now. And then we'll have active cluster. Whatever, active cluster, active account, and exactly the same for active wallet. So we at least need a key and a value. All of these things are required. All of these things are stored in a string. And then later down the line, we'll have other stuff like selected language, for instance. So that's kind of where we want to go here. So I'm just going to jot down some keys. Active key, active cluster, sorry, is a relation to cluster.id. And the same goes for account, and the same goes for wallet, right? Now this is the basic, and then language will be something that we do in the future, which will default to EN. It's not a relation, that's just a value. Currency will default to USD. Maybe we'll have theme that will be dark by default if we also do light. Now, as I said before, you can go totally wild with designing this in a different way. We could have like a preference type where you say, okay, this preference is actually a relation. This one is actually an enum, same as this, same as this. we want to have maybe auto log timeout, which then is a value like, let's say, auto log timeout milliseconds, which is set to 600, and we could say something like enabled, where this is going to be true or false, something like this, right? So we can go fancy afterwards, where then these are all enums, enums. This is a Boolean, and this is a number or even an integer. But for now, I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm going to go ahead and use this schema right here. And then the second thing I'm going to do is actually infer the type of the schema. So we're going to have preference as a thing. And I'm just going to be searching, replacing, as all good devs do, preference schema, which gives us the preference type. Now, if we hover over this with my mouse in my editor, I can already see this is type preference. It has the values that I need, and this is just the type of stuff that I need in order to get this done. So that's amazing. And the next thing we want to do, so if we look at how this is built, so we have the schema, and the schema, let's take cluster as an example. The schema is used to infer the type, as we've seen here, and we have these DTOs, data transfer objects, which basically define which of the fields do we want to omit when creating one. So if we create a new cluster in this case, we don't want to say ID created and updated that, because that's handled in the function. Now, where are these functions? And this is basically how the whole database works. This is where we tie it together. We're using Dexy. So Dexy is a great library to use IndexedDB and create a database around it. So highly recommend checking this out. We're using it. So my next step here will basically, now that I have this type, so we'll basically create a new preferences table. So preferences is a table of preference, and we will need to tell it here for preference which are the keys that are indexed. So which are the keys that we will actually search on, which in our case will be the ID, the key itself. Now, in addition, we want to do we may want to set a default preference. And if you look at how this is done right now, when I add the clusters, so when the database gets created, this populate function gets executed, which is typically a one-time thing, which will then create these items for me. So if I actually go into here, application, I'll zoom this a little bit in. Here in my application, I see IndexedDB and then Samui Wallet DB for this specific origin. And I can actually delete the database. So when I delete the database and I refresh the page, you'll see that it will be starting with these wallets. Now, the nice thing is that I can actually use this in my advantage. So what we can do is a few things. Because as I said, I actually want this DevNet cluster to be selected as default. And I think it's a good idea to do this on the database level. So what I think is a great idea, while we populate the database for the first time, while we add these things, I'll actually have this ID and I'll store it as the selected ID. So that way we actually know active cluster will be set to whatever cluster ID we pick. So I think I'm just going to do that. And I think I'm going to store this with the active cluster ID. So I'm going to say active cluster ID. We still have a random ID because I don't really care about what the ID is. I do care that it is known upfront. So then afterwards, I can actually say, await this.preferences, this.preference.bulk add. And what we'll add here is a created at now. The key will be set to active cluster. The value will be set to, so the key will be set to active cluster string. The value will be set to active cluster. And I realize this thing wants to be called active cluster ID. The value will be set there. We will have an ID for the thing itself, which can just be crypto.random ID, random UUID, and updated that's also now. This should give us a valid ID. And then once we save this and we delete the database again, this should now be set. And actually, if you check here, you can actually see this already, right? So preferences right now is empty, whereas ID has a bunch of things. So if I go here, delete the database and do remove, and then refresh the page, it should be recreated. And then now if we go here, we see clusters where we have the second one being DevNet. First one being DevNet. It's the last one being DevNet. Okay, this is something to figure out. So it's going to be DevNet. And this is F7811. So if we go to preferences key, we should have a value here. Active cluster value F7811. So we're linking the cluster to the cluster ID that we have here. So great. So this is kind of the base. And so we now have the preference option. We store this thing. And let's see what's more there is to it. So one thing that we provide here as part of the database are these helper functions. And these helper functions give you a nice promise-fied way to interact with these things. And basically gonna search and replace these things. And in addition, we have a bunch of React hooks for exactly the same. Now in the future, we may be able to cleanly abstract this into some sort of layer, but because it's a finite set of database tables we have, for now, I'm just gonna be storing these things, creating imperatively. So I'll just be doing some copy and pasting here, preference, actually storing this value in here. And then it'll be a matter of doing a search and replace. So I'm going to be doing this. I want to replace cluster with preference, and I actually want to preserve the case. So I don't want to do case insensitive search. So this should now replace preferences with input wherever we are. And this will eventually, not sure why this doesn't work right here, but this will eventually break because we don't have a bunch of these things. So it's like, yeah, we don't have the preference schema create, which is correct. So we'll need to create that. So preference schema create, I'm just going to be taking example with cluster here. I'll just be renaming cluster for preference. So now we do have the preference schema create. And this also wants a input type. So we also want to have a DTO. So again, basically gonna copy this stuff over and search and replace everything here. So that's one. Now, I did make a typo there. So let's make sure that's fixed. And here DB preferences, it's not there. So this is interesting. I need to figure out why, because I think it should be plural in this sense. Yes, it should be. There we go. Preferences, which breaks it here, preferences, but we want these tables to be plural. This is like the convention that they have. We might want to reconsider this, but for now, let's keep it as is. Let's keep it in line. So this is our DB create and I'll be just knocking out a few more. I'm not going to narrate all of them because it's all the same stuff. So let me go move this one. And then the update one. Perfect. So we have the schemas for all of these, and then next up the DTOs. Yes, I understand that there are people that were like, why don't you use an AI for this? And the reason is that I think it doesn't really save a bunch of time to babysit Gemini or whatever the thing is that you're using, instead of just doing these things manually. And in addition, I like coding. I like writing code. I like doing this shit. So why have an AI do stuff that I like doing myself? Free man can just do these things. You can just do stuff. So these are all the ones, and update. So good. So do another search and replace here. Get these ones out. Deleting preferences may not be something that we need. Now that I think about it, finding many, yes, sure. Finding unique, also sure. And replacing all. So updating, sure, we will need updating. Finding a unique individual preference, sure, I can see where we need like const active wallet is db, like await db preference, find unique. But actually, in this case, you probably don't want to get it by ID. You probably want to get it by key. So let's figure that out if we still need this, if we have find preference by key. Find many, yeah, sure, we want to build a list of preferences. Now, we don't have a bunch of these, so I'm getting rid of these. One thing I do know that we have is key, so we want to be able to find it by key. So that'll be match key. Now it's like, yeah, parsed input doesn't have a key. So we're going to say we want to pick key. We want to pick value. And we don't need this one. So this should bring us back to the find my, which should now be mostly okay, except for this match key. And alphabetical order is important, so we'll move these ones and do it like so. So great, we have these few functions, and the next thing is actually writing tests. So when I start my tests here in the watch mode, this should all still test. And you see a bunch of these things is actually the vtest wallet test. Now there's already an error, which is interesting. So why is this thing failing? It cannot do bulk add. Should update a cluster. Interesting. So actually that DB test fails. Okay, so one of the tests here it fails. It should have the expected tables. I agree that this should fail because we're adding a table. So that's quite an easy fix. So this should be preferences, which my autocomplete already knows. And let's see, why is the preference singular? DB table maps, table name. Let's rerun this text from scratch. Preference versus preferences. Now somewhere it looks like it's still finding the singular one. Well, yes, because I didn't update it here. If somebody's watching along and you already saw this, nothing as annoying as seeing somebody not update a property where you should. But here we are. It's updated now, and this should be good to go. I'll be implementing more of these tests. So preference create, sure. Preference delete. Now it's already kind of doubtful if we need like full CRUD for these things, but let me first build it out, and then we can delete these things later, kind of as and when we go. So I'm going to be going here and do the search and replace again. If somebody doesn't work this way, let me know how you do these things. Either write them all out or ask your favorite AI buddy to do it. But this is how I've been doing it for almost 20 years, probably longer. So yeah, old habits die hard, as they like to say. So I'll stick with this. Now this should fail, and it does, so that's great. The schema doesn't apply, clearly, because we're testing a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be there. So let's actually go over these things and figure out what they need to do and what they're actually doing. Let me grab some water in the meantime while my editor is catching up. Doing a bunch of formatting. So in general, I know endpoint is not something we're interested in this whole test suite. So I'll just delete any reference to endpoint. And I'll delete any reference to name. Actually gonna change this and calling name a value key, key. And I'll be calling type the value. And this should at least make it compile a bit more. Oh, that's not what I meant. I meant the property over here. Still have some endpoints laying around. So sure. Let me delete those. And then I have some loose commas. God, I'm making a total mess of this. Which won't be the first time. Okay, 53 errors back to 0. That's beautiful. So what I can do is actually already test this. Now, here is where I have a issue. So I should say H for help, T to filter by test regex. It will now only test this one. So great. So we're should be only testing the one that I filtered. Yes. Still testing the same thing. Let me actually see file name pattern. Yes, this is the one. Preference find many. Okay, good. So preferences find many. So let's actually make sure this is somewhat realistic. So preference 1. Well, let's do preference key 1 and preference value 1. Let's copy this over and here as well. And do 2 and 3. And then if it finds by key, preference key, it should find 1. Let's see if that already helps. should find by partial, key, and type. Well, that's no longer a thing, because let's see how we did this in our find many. We only allow searching for key and ID. We don't care about settling for value, so we can remove the test by partial endpoint. We can remove the test by type. So we can just have a test find by ID, find by key, and then this should be key, which should then move to less failed errors. So I'm going to clear this up, save, so it triggers again. Expected string included. So this is DB preferences create. Yeah, okay, we're not testing the create body. Let me figure this out, test file name. And do it like so. DB preferences find many, it's 1. Let's clear this up, do it again. Partial, file name, many, 1. Okay. DB preference create. Why is it testing this test? Let me actually tag a dot only. And this should only test, as the name suggests, this should only test this thing, which it does not. Okay, I need to look into this. Why doesn't this work as expected? But for now, find many test. Line 92. Okay, cool. So we can update the value here, and I'm just gonna copy over the dummy preferences we have here. So there's really no need to make this anything special. And if the key is preferences key 1, we should find 1. So this should already make the test make less fail. Line 93, let's go there. Okay. And it should just have an array with this one. Still getting the same thing, expected error key. Okay. If somebody is watching and see what is going wrong here, please let me know. If not, no worries, I'll figure it out. Let's skip this. And let me also actually skip a bunch of these. So it's dot skip. There we go. Okay, now we have something that we can work with. So let's start with the first one. And let's see how can we make this one work. So by partial key. Right, here it expects to find the first 2, but we're actually, in reality, we're expecting the first 1. So this one should now pass. Yes. We'll just go over one by one. Here as well, I'll just pop in these test preferences instead of having the residue from the others. And then I expect this one to work as well. There we go. Next, it should find many preferences by key. So let's see, let's actually search for preference key. And then we actually expect these to be 3. Yep. And then we expect these keys to be the same. So it should contain this one as well as 3 and 2. There we go. Cool. Unexpected behavior. It should throw an error when finding fails. Sure. Should throw an error when finding preferences fails. I expect this to just work. Because right here, what we're doing, we're just mocking, well, not when I skip it, but we're just mocking these things. Okay, so cool. So this all works. So finding many preferences works. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and skip the other tests for now, because I want to get something on the screen. So let me actually delete these for now and make sure the tests work. So we're going to restart the whole test suite, and this should now just work as expected. Great. And the next thing that we want to have is a React query hook for these things. So we'll say db preference options. And here as well, we're just going to be some rough search and replace. Again, we need to figure out what do we need. I need to discuss this with Toby. He might have ideas around this, and I'm pretty sure we don't need all of these. So this is something TBD, but I'll just do something that I know we do need, which is having these inputs. So we have db preferences find many. So this is great. So now we can have a place where we can find all of our preferences while we load the app. And then one of the preferences I'm most interested about is the actual key value thing. So when I load this screen, I want to be able to say, hey, this is the active cluster. I know the key. I want to show this. So wherever I fix this, I fetch this thing. I also want to fetch which cluster is the active one. In addition, I want an operation that I can say, set this thing to active, yes or no. So we want to do the update. Now, one shortcut that I can take, and I might take, is actually use the key as the ID. What do I mean with that? If we go here and we see the key is called active cluster, we give it a random ID. But when I look at the find unique, we actually find it unique by ID. So there's basically two ways to do this. I can say find unique by key. And do it something like this. Take a key, update the error, and then I need to figure out how this is done. Well, yeah, get key, but this doesn't work that way. And the reason that is because the get function uses the key of the table, which is not our key. However, there's also a get where I can pass in a key and a value. So let's see if this is going to work. Now, here is clearly a case where I must use the test to figure out if this works. So I can say db preference find unique by key. This was not what I meant. I was meaning to update the test. Delete this fella. The funny thing here is that while I was like, oh yeah, I'll just implement the preference table so that I can move on. The funny thing is that this directly gets me about a bunch of questions, right? Do we need the delete? Do we ever want to delete one of these preferences? Like if we think about the data set here that I sketched out in this schema, it's always good to work with some realistic data, right? And figure out if this makes any sense. If I look at any of these, the question is, does it ever make sense to actually delete this entry from the database? Or is it something that you'll just either toggle it. Now I'm kind of leaning towards the second option. So I think a lot of these things, we'll just set them. So we'll go in here and say, we have the language set to EN. And, oh, sorry, not that, EN. And we'll have the language currency. Language should actually be here, currency should be here. We'll have this set to USD. And in addition, this is also probably potentially where we want to say, oh, actually the options you have here, we don't have options right now, but the options you have here is USDC or Euro and USDC, USD, sorry. And then same goes for language. It will be English and Spanish initially. So this is probably where we want to go. So with that in mind, I don't think it makes sense to ever delete one of these things, because this code will not rerun unless we like delete the database, as I did a few times here. So yeah, figuring this out if and when we go. So I'm going to be actually jotting down a bunch of questions here that I have. And do we need to ever delete a reference? Do we need to look up a reference by its ID? Now, why would you want to look up a preference? General things, if you want to look them up by ID, like you go to the detail screen. So right here, we have this F78 is the ID of this DevNet cluster. We want to be able to navigate to this. We want to be able to fetch it, look it up from the database. For preference, though, these things are kind of hidden out of sight. So in here, you won't really see them. We'll fetch them when we load this page. And then we'll make sure it's there. So we can highlight the one that's active and disable the active button and present the active button at the others. And then if you click activate, it should make that one active and leave the rest untouched. And then clearly this will be a drop down here on the top somewhere where you can actually pick select cluster, select active cluster, and switch quickly. One of the things that current wallets don't have is the ability to quickly select clusters or the ability to add multiple DevNet clusters. So this is something that we need to figure out. I don't think we need a way to get a cluster by unique, find unique. So let's add that to the nodes in the schema. By its ID. So the concern is here, we can either have so we can either have that take the key as its ID. I don't really like that. I think I prefer being specific, or we can use the ID as its, use the key as the ID. So what I mean with that, if we create a setting, we can basically say, okay, this ID is going to be coming from here. It's not how I typically do it, but something like this, .key, which would get the same effect. I think the preferred option is to currently preferred option is not have but have by key. And that way we can just leave the ID as is. We can kind of ignore it for all intents and purposes. And we're then specific, we're explicit in what we're doing. So this question, I'm gonna have this, I'm gonna talk with Toby hopefully today to answer these things. Do we have a delete preference? That's a great thing as well, right? Do we delete these things? Creating, yes, I see the need of creating it. And why do I see this need? Well, this database, this cluster thing, it's kind of convenient that we already add a bunch of test clusters. But for the accounts and wallets, we will not have this here. So the accounts and wallets, we will have typically a typical onboarding flow where we go through, and this then in the back we'll call into this DB preference create and set like active account to the first one that is there and active wallet to the first one that's there. So this one definitely be used. This one I don't think we'll use it. Find many. We may not need find many either, actually, because these settings, these preferences, they're either embedded here in this bespoke UI for clusters. So here's where we have the DB preference find unique by key, because we want to know active clusters when we build the screen. Here's where we'll have like the DB preference update, because we want to be able to set that key with a different value. In the account section, we will have create and find unique by key. So in fact, I don't think we need DB preference find many either. So do we need I'm just going to do it like this because these are the operations I'm actually interested in. Where's the schema? So yeah, I think both of these are not needed. I hate my copy paste on this stuff. So do we need the DB preference find many? I don't think we have. So summing it up, right here, going back to the schema, what is what I think we need? Yeah. Programmatically. Why is this wrong? Programmatically create a reference, for example, during Hey, something is wrong with my stream. No longer sharing my screen. Let me see what happens. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Situation normal, all fucked up. This actually wants to be active wallet, active account ID, and active cluster ID. I just realized this active cluster ID. We want to set active cluster ID. We don't want to set these ones just yet, but this is where the other options will go. So cleaning this one up, active cluster ID is this, which is set here to the ID, which we then link to the active cluster ID, which is our setting. So active cluster ID, like this. So what I think we need, DB create, yes, definitely. What I also think we need is a DB preference to find a specific reference by their key. Kind of obvious. For example, in the cluster list, we need to highlight cluster. Then, so create, yes. Delete, I don't think we need it. I don't think we need this either. I already named this an update. So DB preference update to update an existing reference with a new value. For example, when selecting a new cluster in the list, we update active cluster ID. And that's it. And I think this is it. And this is what we should have. Now, related ideas. And what is the related idea here? I actually think it may make sense to have a ZOT schema that defines our keys, the keys that we support. And this way we can like programmatically go over these things. And I'm actually going to call this. I'm actually already going to do this. Now this is similar to how we do cluster type. So cluster type here has a schema. So cluster type can be either one of these. So I'm going to do the same here. And I'm going to say this is preference key schema. And the preference key schema for now will have one key. Actually might do all of the active ones because that way I can, no, I'm just going to do one key, active cluster ID. So the only things we allow here is to have a active cluster ID set as a reference. Now, when we create a schema, when we create actually a cluster, we're not doing this, but we need to make sure that if you create a cluster, that the type is actually type. Like we do this on compile time, but we don't do this in runtime. So to do add runtime check to ensure cluster.type is valid. Now, while we're here, we may already do the right thing. So instead of doing this, let's say const parsed, I think I did this parsed input, yes. So when we create a reference, so let's parsed input, let's do this one first. Let's replace this one with that. And now we want to ensure that parsed input dot key exists in the parsed key schema are reference. Well, this is not what we want, brother. Actually, I don't know how to do this with Zod, so let's see. Using reference key schema. So this is how I typically like to use Gemini, mainly for small specific things that I don't really know how to do. I'm definitely not from the vibe coding school. You gotta love how they refer to themselves as a world-class software engineering coding assistant. Happy to help me. Just need to make sure that it makes sense. I'll accept it. Okay, interesting. It's actually super simple. And then we actually want to test to make sure that this works. So this is another thing that I've been using quite a lot. So I'll be saying implement db reference create.test.ts modeled after db cluster create test following the schema in reference schema. Ensure that you test the case. And do it like so. And this saves me clearly a lot. And for these tests, there's a lot of repetition. And this is a great thing. I really like using it for these kind of things. Which also is something that I don't really enjoy. I do enjoy other parts of the coding, but like going over all of these tests, figuring out the cases. Well, yeah, you might as well just do it, brother. You want me to do this? I'll do it. db reference create. Yes. How the fuck is this not gonna work? Copy. Paste. Oh, it's not working. This thing. So please do this for me. And yeah, so this is kind of the thing that I'm working on right now for Samui. I intend to share more of these. I hope to be able to do a live stream like these for the next following days. I do still need to figure out it's interesting, and any feedback here is welcome. Code change filter parse cannot be accepted. Manually apply them. I don't like this. I'll go ahead and copy this, and create a new prompt and do this, paste this. Come on, brother. Implement db references create test based on db cluster create test take into account the unexpected behavior of adding a trial, create a reference with a key that's not in references key schema. Let's see if this works. Would be kind of nice to have this thing running. And then this would also make a great moment to wrap up this first stream where I go over hacking on Samui Wallet for the Solana Cypherpunk Hackathon. And yeah, so for those of you watching, I hope you all enjoyed these things, accept all changes, and there we go. So it looks like it wrote the test. So let's quickly go over this if it makes sense. So it should create a preference, and the input is here, the reference is there. Now, one of the things that happens here, it does clear these preferences all the time. So when we populate this thing, it will clear, which is great. This is why we can add this thing. We probably want to have a condition that disallows adding the same key multiple times. So I'm going to do another to do here, which actually says add runtime check to ensure key does not already exist in the database. So in a database like Postgres, you'd add a unique constraint on this. I'm fairly sure that DAXI does not have the concept of a unique constraint. Now, there may be a library that does this, like a package, but I'm fairly sure that this is not the way to go. Well, let me actually see. Oh. A database operation was attempted that violates a constraint. For example, you've defined a unique name index. Okay, so with this ampersand, we can do a unique constraint. So let's actually go and do that. So actually, I want a test case. Add a test case that adds two preferences with the same key. Let's see if we can get this to fail, because that would clearly be a great thing to have, and this would make it so that we don't have the this would make it clear that we don't have the we don't have to do the runtime check imperatively, but like the database can do this for us. Of course, here's the test. Should accept all changes. So what I typically like to do, let me also go on a branch, settings, preferences. Just do a git add, stage changes, accept. And now this test fails because it will just let the problem resolved instead of rejecting. So great. Okay, so let's go ahead and update our schema. It didn't understand my question. Well, I guess it interpreted, it already assumed that I would have made this database change. But so what I expect, if I put the ampersand here in key, now it should fail as expected. Okay, error creating preference, key already exists. So this is different, but the thing is updated. Now other things fail. DB preferences find many. Yeah, actually, so I'm kind of on the verge of just deleting this because we don't want to use this. I know, deleting tests to make them pass is kind of a thing. That's made fun of. However, this is how we roll. Now, what's happening here is that we said it expected an error. So if we get rid of this thing, there's actually no error. And this is because the preference input create is not linked to this thing. And this is because we don't link in the preference schema. We actually don't link the key, similar to how this cluster schema links to the cluster type. So how does that work? Type is cluster type schema. So if we go here, we want to say key, it's actually reference key schema. And with this, we should now have all of this still working. We also want to say, just as we have reference type, we want to say cluster type, we want to have reference key as a TypeScript type. And this is reference key schema, which makes this reference key. And then preference key should just have one value, active cluster ID. So this is great. So this helps us a lot. And then if we have, for instance, the references find by ID, now we can actually make this a reference key type instead. And this is really cool because now we can say, okay, const get the active cluster ID equals await DB preferences, pass in the DB, and this is now strictly typed. Awesome. Happy with this. I'm actually going to make the call and get rid of unique. I'm also going to make the call of getting rid of. No, I'm not going to make the call. Yeah, unique and find many. And delete. So I think I'm just going to call it. And if this is not a great ID, I think we can always go back and add these things back, right? So, yeah. Bunch of questions, bunch of things that I have to run by Toby. So I'm going to do a final review over this. So I'm going to add all. So we have this preference options. Now this, okay, so this is kind of, let me actually do a proper job and clean this up as well. So now that I assume that these are the three ones we're running with, now I can actually go ahead and say, okay, preference options. What options do we need? So we said we only want to have create. We don't care about delete. We don't care about find many. And our find unique is actually called find unique by key, where this is not an ID, but this is a key, where this is not a string, but it's a preference key. And this function needs to be imported from here. And there's a bunch more things that we can do. So I think the preference input update schema. Yep, this should already work as expected. So let's get rid of all of these things that we don't need. And let's see how this then works. So we're going to take cluster create and I'm going to say preference create. We're going to say cluster find by unique, which is going to be preferences find unique by key. And we're going to have update, which is going to be preference update. We don't care about find many. Now here we're going to do our good old search and replace, as well as here. Search and replace. Now this will fail, which is great. Let's quickly do this. So you gotta love it when stuff fails because, you know, TypeScript is doing its work. Now it says by key, which actually expects a key, which here expects a key. which is a preference key, like so. Now let's see how we would use this. So we would say function use some hook. And now we can say const active cluster ID is use db preferences find unique key, where key is the active cluster ID. And in fact, so much so that we can go back here and actually implement this. And this is kind of cool. I didn't consider we were getting this close, but here in my cluster list, this is where I want to do this thing. So here, items, I actually want to know which one is my active cluster ID. So I can say active cluster ID is use db preference, find unique key. Now what I'm curious about is why is this, I put a space there, that's why. So this is kind of cool. And now in my cluster list, I can say active cluster ID is this one, which sure enough should be passed in here. Now this may be null. I'm happy with that, potentially, from a typing point of view. And let's make it so that if the active cluster ID is equal to item.id, let's make it default, otherwise make it outline. And now if we hit save, definite should be active. All goes well. If it's not, we're doing something wrong here. Okay, so something's wrong. So let's do some good old debugging. So let me figure out, okay, so this needs to be data dot value for null. And let me actually see what comes back from this active cluster ID query. So the data here, active cluster ID is null. Okay, so the reason that this is true is because we renamed the ID. So if I delete the database and refresh, now it should be working. There we go, it's there. It's now, it looks different. It doesn't look great, but it looks different, so that's good. Let me actually see, so variant here. Let me actually see, what does item have? Is it muted? Okay, cool. Okay, let's then do the rest as well and get something totally working that we can then be happy with. So I want this button. How do you gonna make it active? Well, checkbox or something. Checkbox. Yeah, sure. So we don't care about if it's sure. We want to set active. Activate. Set active. Whatever. Naming is hard. So set active. Set active. So prevent default set active. It's checkbox. And we want this thing to be disabled when active cluster ID equals item.id. So if it's already active, you cannot do this. In fact, I think we can even make it so that if this one is here, don't show it, otherwise show the button. So the button will only show on the inactive ones. Disable check. We should have tooltips. Sure. let's actually go in here, and now this starts screaming. So yes, we need DB preference update. So we're going to be using this fella. Let's see, why is this? Oh, it's just the editor is not updated. So we'll have a update function. So we'll say const x. What does this take? It takes the key. I'm happy with that. So we'll say update. So update preference mutation, right? This is what the thing is called. And this is called find unique preference query. The active cluster is actually that. So now we're going to say set active. We're going to get a cluster here. And what do we want to do here? We say update mutate in sync. This is not the right one. This is update. And I actually want update to take a key. So we need to find out input preference ID, update schema, create partial, but we definitely want to have, we must have the key in here. We're having the ID. Okay, so we can make this work right now and we can make it beautiful afterwards, right? Remember, friends, make it right, make it work, make it fast. So what I need here is the ID. So the idea is to find unique preference data ID. So if we don't have this, we can basically ignore whatever is happening here. So we want to make sure we have this. And we want to make sure we have that. And then why is set active not true? Set active is not true. It's not assignable to a promise, which we can fix. We can just say await here. Now, TypeScript happy. TypeScript's not happy. Why? Because this key is not there. Why? Because we don't need it. Right? So now I should be able to set other things active. Yes. Now the thing that I don't do here is update the preferences. So after this is done, we probably want to orchestrate that right here. I might be wrong. Don't think I'm wrong. I'm going to do it imperatively here where we are at, and I'm going to ask with Toby, like, how should we actually do this? And so const client equals use query client. We have access to this thing. Okay. Then we can have it here. Use client is use query client. Sure. We can take this. So these are options, right? Options. Const options equals this. Which we want to spread through a thing like so. Then what I want to do next is say on success, get the data, and call options.onSuccess with the data. Sure. But I also want to Okay, so this might be undefined. If option success, call it. How is something like this? Let's call these things props. On success props. Let's take all of them. Right, so this is good. And then client.invalidate, so this needs to be a sure, I need to execute this function, invoke this function. So now we're going to say options dot, no, it's db preference options dot find unique key. In fact, actually, interestingly enough, I do want to have the key in the update function. Because in fact, here when I update the props, I'm actually not interested in the ID, and I must have the key. So let me see, we have a few things here on the update. Let's see, it's a similar thing here. I think it's actually with the create here. With the create here, we're interested in we must have the account ID. We must have this one. So how about I go here, and then for preference update, I'm going to say this is partial. Oh, by the way, key is reference schema.shape.key. Now what I hope this does is that it makes this input so that key is always required. So there you go. Now, is this what we want? In fact, I don't think it is. Let's undo this. Let's update this function here. So when we say this update, I actually want this to be the key. And I reckon I can do something like this here, where key is key. So then I can just say key, where key is reference key. And this allows us to do this. I'm going to double check this because it says key or update to key. Yeah, let's just try and see if this works. So now this one here should require a key. So the BP preference mutate options, this one should have my key. I might just want to put it here. Let's have this one. I'm just going to put it here. Key is the options. I'm just going to add it, tack it on here. Here is preference key. I'm going to make this one as well. Okay, cool. So why is this interesting? Well, we have this key right here. So we can say this key right here. Or do we just want to have it here? I think we just want to have it here. I think this is the way to go. Yes. Okay, amazing. So cool. So this works. Now, find unique by key. Used for this. So we should get the key here. So in any case, this is going to be async, so we can await. Now this is going to be an array. This should stop typing it, sure. And then we can just say DB preference options dot find by unique key. And what is our key? Well, our key is props dot. Let's just take it here. I'm just going to do it for now. Key is cluster key, now preference key. Just make it work, right? Dot key dot query key, and this is an array. Okay, well. Okay, query line is not needed here, so that's kind of beautiful. Now let me see. Okay, this is good. So key is going to be active cluster ID, so I'm happy with that. Let's see. Error updating preference. Well, I love it when an error happens. We don't build this stuff for nothing. Updating preference with key active key cluster ID. So updating the key here doesn't work. Okay, can't do it imperatively. We can always update it afterwards. So we're calling into this thing. DB preference options. Update key. So this thing doesn't work. So we're going to find it. So reference is await DB preference find unique by key. We're passing the DB key. And then this is reference.id. There we go. Now it should work. Amazing. So we made it work. So just going to summarize it all. Started by creating this DB schema and sketch out some of the things that we expect to get in here. We decided we're going to need these kind of types of things, key value. Then fairly soon already figured like, hey, we might not need delete many. I kind of summed it up like this is what I actually think we need. We need to create find by key and update. This might want to be called update by key, not sure. And then we invert the TypeScript types so we can reference them in our code. And this one as well. Here's where we created a schema of the keys that we allow. We then added some DTOs. We don't need to find many DTO. The other ones have 3, we now have 2, which makes sense because we only do the update and the delete. We then went ahead and implement these helper functions and some tests to find this stuff. Let's see, tests are still failing, well working. Amazing. And I'm going to have Gemini create a test for the and I'll do the same for DB preference update, please. I'm going to have it create a test for that update as well. Do a quick git add so I can go ahead and see what it actually changed. And then lastly, we started actually using this in our cluster list, where we would fetch the active preference, pass it into the list, make sure the list is visually different than the active list. And we added a button that if the cluster is not active, you'll get this little button, which then allows you to update this preference and make them active. Now, one thing here is that we may want to make this different and get actually a decent message here. So we should be able to do this actually right here, where we say on success data, toast success cluster updated to, and now we want to have like template string cluster updated to template string. Oh, and then whatever we got passed in. But I think this one returns the ID, which is a number, which is the amount of things that it updates. So it should say cluster updated to 1, cluster updated to 1. So if we want to do this smarter and say cluster updated to testnet, etc., we'll need to make sure that our update function updates returns the updated item. So for now, I'm just going to call this undefined, and we're going to have it like so. And then in the future, we can look at how to do these things properly. I'm going to accept all changes. So now I should run the test. Let's see why it fails. We can figure this out. Update, rejected promise. Yeah, okay. This is the unexpected behavior. And value updates. Yeah, okay, so the update payload should never receive a key, because we're never going to update the key. So let's go ahead and do db preference update, input this one, this schema. It should omit the key, making it just really one value that we want to update. So this now omits here, which then should fail this test. So invalid key, invalid field. This field will be good. Okay, now this will not be good. So preference update, like let's strongly type this thing so that this one is happy. Now, it's still, we'll just do it. db preference update. So let's parse this. Parsed input equals this. Let's move this and call it parsed input. And just do good old console log. See what it gives us. So parsed input, I expect a value. Cluster ID, sure, but for this one, it only. Let's see what it comes with. Again, let's see what it comes with. $91, it should fail. It expects to throw, but it doesn't throw. Well, let's see. If not, object.keys, parsed inputs at length, throw. There we go. Now it's better. Now, again, we made it work. We now need to make it right. So this is where I'm going to leave you guys and going to figure out how we're going to make it right. Looks like the stream already gone. Can't see your screen anymore. Sorry, I didn't have this. Didn't see this. Sorry, sorry, Chipes. I've been just rambling for the last 15 minutes. Somehow screen disconnected. I'm really sorry. Next live stream, I will be better and paying more attention, which also means I'm going to leave it right here. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope to see you soon in the next one. Bye-bye.